It's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Welcome back to Tiny House Conversations. On the show today, I'm speaking with April Whiston, the founder of Cabin Connect, Australia's leading online marketplace and professional platform for alternate living and holiday options. Cabin Connect offers you a quick and easy way to sell your park cabin, your van, your lifestyle home, and of course, your tiny house, connecting you to thousands of buyers who visit their website every month. And in this conversation, we talk about what Cabin Connect is and the process to buy and sell a lifestyle home, the growing tiny house movement and demand for tiny homes on Cabin Connect, the opportunity and benefits for multi-generational living. This was a topic that we were both passionate in talking about. We also talked about the endless multi-purpose ways that people are using cabins, tiny homes, and caravans, the affordable housing market and alternative solutions, and plenty more. This was a great conversation. April had a lot of wisdom to share, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So let's go hang out and chat with April. Hi, April. Welcome to Tiny House Conversations, and thanks so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to have you. And you're the founder of Cabin Connect, which is Australia's leading online marketplace for new cabins, park cabins, vans, lifestyle homes, and tiny houses, what we really love. And I'd love if you're able to start by sharing with us some of your background and what was it that inspired you to create Cabin Connect?
Yeah, awesome. Cabin Connect is an evolving platform. So it started probably around about 7 years ago. And I was, first and foremost, I was a nurse. And then I met my husband who had just discharged from the Air Force to go and run his dad's holiday park up in Echuca, Moama, right up on the Murray. And I always said, I'm not going to Echuca unless I'm going to get married. And anyway, lo and behold, got married. And I found myself transitioning from being a registered nurse to a full-time 24/7 caravan park manager. And it was in that role that I started to see how we could do things a little bit differently. I was exposed to marketing and things. Obviously, you're not exposed to that when you're nursing. And it was when the global financial crisis hit that our park was really quite large. So we used to own Marul Holiday Park up in Echuca. And we ended up going from pretty much around about 10 to 15 cabins for sale at any time to 64. So just to put a bit of context in that, we had 330 on-site vans or cabins, and to have 64 of those up for sale at the end of the GFC was not a really good look for the park. People were saying, well, why do people not want to be here? What's going on? Is management really bad? What's happening? And it wasn't any of that. It was just that people, after the global financial crisis, couldn't afford to keep the cabins. They couldn't afford to pay the site fees. And so they had to sell. And people were selling. And back then, Gumtree was just evolving. It was a very clunky platform, and it was more so for just selling, odds and ends. And people were actually using eBay to sell these cabins. And from a park owner, manager perspective, I didn't want my business to be marketed on this platform because it didn't really showcase everything that my park had to offer. And it also wasn't like a hugely professional way to promote these assets. And I thought, no, I want it to be more like realestate.com, but for the cabin industry. And so I built a website. I'd never done it before. I used the Wix platform and I just sort of stumbled my way through, and I started using it initially for my park. And so for the first 2 or 3 years, we exclusively just used it for our park as a test pilot to see how it would work. And what happened was we started selling cabins quicker. We started selling cabins and on-site vans for higher prices because we were having more exposure. There was more of a demand on the supply that we had. We were getting really good clients who were, buying into the park. And it was just sort of like a win-win. It was really easy for us to manage our sales list because before that we were managing it in like Word or Excel, and you'd have to change it every single time and print it out. So we were able to move to like an electronic sales list. Consumers really liked it. And so that's how we started, and that's why we started. It was really for my own necessity as a caravan park owner. And now, move forward to 2022, we're open to loads of different options. Pretty much if it's relocatable, it can go on the platform. We have hundreds of parks who have used it. We have many tiny house owners who have used it. And we now have manufacturers using it to list their, off the plan concepts, or if they've got stock, if they're lucky to have stock, they can sell whatever stock they've got on the platform. So that's how we sort of began, really.
That's great. And I think that you're around and, you're here at such an important time, I think, with everything that's going on in the world, that, a lot more people are looking to this alternate ways of living and lifestyle setups for their homes, and even like having Airbnbs on their properties and so many types of things. And of course, the tiny house movement in particular is growing a lot in Australia and around the world. And I think it's a really unique and great idea to be able to connect that type of lifestyle with people that are looking to more towards this way of living. So that's really great. And I'd love if you're able to share with us a little bit more about how Cabin Connect works. So like, what would be the process of becoming a seller, or if someone wanted to buy from your platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cabin Connect is really built in a way that it's built for consumers. So to use Cabin Connect, it's really easy. So if you wanted to add your listing to Cabin Connect, so let's just say you owned a tiny house and it was time for you to sell, maybe you were upgrading, maybe you were transitioning, you were going to travel, you didn't need it anymore, whatever the circumstances are, you can literally just go onto the platform and you click add listing, go through the process, add, all of your details, bathrooms, bedrooms, price, images, those sorts of things. And you publish it, and it comes to me. I review it. So I review every single thing that goes on the platform to make sure that it's appropriate. And then we put it out there. The platform, gets around about 2,500 users a day. So it's got good traffic. And we also share that onto our Facebook platform as well, which has also got good traffic and good numbers. So that's the way it's added. We don't charge any commissions on any of the sales. There's just a basic fee. So people can choose from basic, which starts at $47, and premium that goes to $297. And the main difference between those is just advertising. So to do that, people can really get their asset onto the Cabin Connect platform very cost effectively, with no commissions, and reach a really wide and niche demographic. This is the thing that I think some people don't realize, because a lot of people are still using Facebook Marketplace and stuff like that, which is great. You get lots of traffic there. But the reality is the 2,500 users a day that we're seeing on Cabin Connect, they're niche. They're a niche market. They're interested. They follow. Our returning visitors is a huge percentage of our website. So people are constantly checking back to see what's new. So that's how people add. Now, if you are wanting to sell, if you are wanting to buy, same thing applies. You just look through the list, you find something that you're interested in, and you connect directly with the seller. So it's very much a buyer-seller connection platform. That's why we call it, Cabin Connect, because we're connecting buyers and sellers so that they can do the sale together. In some circumstances, the park managers do that process, but that's fine. It's no big deal. So it's a great platform to allow consumers to connect, and we really don't get involved in the sale process. We are working on a sale of asset contract at the moment with our solicitors, so people can template their sale of asset contract, because it's really important when people do sell a cabin on-site van, tiny house, anything that's relocatable, they're not registerable. So you really should do a sale of asset contract. So in the coming weeks, hopefully, fingers crossed, we should have that templated sale of asset contract available for people to download and use off the Cabin Connect platform. So it's really, really easy. And yeah, it's web-based platform, built in WordPress, and it's quite good speed-wise. And yeah, we're pretty happy with it.
Oh, that's really great to hear. And, what I really love and what you mentioned at the start of that is there is a vetting process. So, people can rest assured that who they're going to be connected with, is someone that's, I suppose you could say ethical or, is coming from a good place, because especially now with our world being so online, there's lots of things going online and different unethical practices, or you don't know who's at the other end often. And so it's really nice to be able to have that trusted source and that trusted vetting. You can rest assured that, the process between and the connection between the seller and the buyer is a good one. So that's really great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, it's important, to know that your information that you're putting on is remaining confidential and it stays in Australia. It stays with us on our servers. And, privacy is a big thing that I'm, big on, because people are putting their information on a database, their phone numbers, where their asset is based. So yeah, it's really important that we maintain that and keep it confidential and private. And we want to reassure that, this is an Australian-based platform. It's built in Australia by an Australian for Australians. So we're big on that.
So good. That's so good to hear. And are you able to give us a bit of an idea of the price ranges for the different types of homes that you've got listed on Cabin Connect? I'm sure there's a different range, but yeah.
There is an enormous range. Yeah. So we can have things listed from as little as like $5,000. It might be a little old caravan and annex that someone's moving on for relocation from a caravan park, and that's really going to be sold, and the caravan's probably going to be converted into a trailer. So that's the very entry level. And we have had cabins on the platform listed for up to $480,000. They are mega mansions, I call them, and they're really quite amazing. Those ones that are listed for about $480,000, they're generally on the Murray River or on a river or some sort of beachfront sort of property. They're usually raised on stilts, got quite a impressive steel structure, and they're usually like 4 or 5 bedrooms with multiple bathrooms and incredibly impressive builds. So yeah, huge range.
Amazing. And what about tiny houses? Is there a sort of range for those?
Yeah, tiny houses, generally what we've been seeing is there's not many tiny houses that are really coming in under, I think probably the lowest pricing that I've seen is maybe around $60,000. So with tiny houses, you're looking anywhere from around about $60,000, probably up to around about $150,000 for tiny houses. Varies depending on all of the inclusions and stuff like that they have in them. I would say tiny houses have a narrower price range, purely because of size, really. So, you can't have a 20 by 5 meter wide, tiny house. It's not then tiny, So the difference in pricing between, say, a cabin and a tiny house is purely based on price. It's not based on finishing, because some of the tiny houses that are coming through are absolutely incredible. They have got, quality stone finishing. They've got gorgeous designs. They're so impressive. So it's more just the price difference between, say, a luxury cabin and a luxury tiny house is purely based on square meterage. That's pretty much the only difference in price. Finish is, impressive in both of those categories.
Yeah, and 60 to 150,000 sounds about, right with what the market is doing anyway. Mm-hmm. I've seen that type of price range out there, whether it's with DIY builds or it's with people going with professional building companies. So that's really great to know. And and as you say, it depends on the specs and the size and the features. And I'm also wondering, with the tiny house movement and awareness of tiny houses in Australia and around the world, especially in the last couple of years with everything that's happening in our lives, I'm wondering what you've observed with the demand for tiny houses on your platform over these last couple of years, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. Tiny houses they've really found their way into the Australian market. Maybe 3 years ago, they were sort of not a novelty, but they were new. People weren't really familiar with them. They didn't really know the difference between them and, say, a caravan or a motorhome. Whereas now they've really established their own category, their own division within our marketplace. And what we've really noticed over the last few years is that the demand for tiny houses has increased a lot. And the setups that we've seen are really impressive. You can now, buy a tiny house that's set up on a property, and effectively move in like you would like a normal house. So that's really good. One of the other things that we've seen a really big influx for is multi-generational living. And this is something that I'm really passionate about. And I think that in Australia, we are behind the rest of the world in this. We live very segmented from our families. So, we have our own, close-knit family like mum, dad, kids, or whatever their dynamics are. But not often do you see the grandparents living or the uncle or auntie living under that same roof. And I think we're really starting to see a shift in that, especially with, the challenges that we've seen and obviously increasing expenses to live and maintain a house. If you can have the grandparents living in the same house as the family or on the same property, it's becoming a lot more cost effective. There's people there to supervise the children, all those sorts of things. So we're definitely seeing a lot of inquiries come through to us where people are saying, oh, my daughter's having a baby. I'd really love her to move back home and, live in a tiny house in our backyard so that we can be there to provide care and support because she's still going to have to work. But all of these sorts of things. So that multi-generational living and a tiny house is a really great option. What I can see as the biggest barrier to multi-generational living in Australia is council regulation. So councils are really resistive to allow multiple dwellings on one property. But I do think it's something that as an industry, we really need to push for and promote because it's a great solution. It reduces isolation and loneliness in older people. It provides caregiving services for young families, and it offers children the opportunity to live and be around their extended family, which is so valuable. So I think if we can see more tiny houses finding their ways into, reasonably sized, you don't want people living on top of each other, but if we can find tiny houses moving more into your family environment, I think it's only a good thing, really.
Absolutely. I love that you just talked about multi-generational living because I feel like tiny homes or these alternative ways of living, it's more than just the home and the house, right? It's community, it's family. And I know for me that one of the main reasons that tiny homes appeals to me is that it does open up that opportunity for multi-generations to live next to or nearby each other, while still maintaining their independence and their privacy, but also really allows more connection with family and to be more present in each other's lives. And as you mentioned, the whole loneliness and the separation thing. And I think that it is a reflection of just what is happening out there in the world collectively too. It's like so many of us are craving and wanting to go back to basics, to nature, to reconnect with each other, to form communities again. And I think that, this way of living really supports that. And I agree with you also with the council regulations. I know that's something I've talked about with quite a few people on the show already, and hoping to speak to someone from the Australian Tiny House Association in the coming weeks or something, because that seems to be a barrier. And I know that there are people under the radar, and it differs with different states, and then within that different councils there's nuances, and whether someone's in a tiny house on wheels or it's a tiny house on a foundation, and there's also all sorts of different things. There's a lot of grey areas at the moment. I'm hopeful though, as this way of living becomes more popular, whether it's tiny houses or just alternative ways of living than, you know, having the mortgage and the big home and or the apartment or whatever, that hopefully there will be some more clarity and less gray areas and more acceptance of this way of living. And yeah, I'm really interested to actually just see what happens out of all of this. But yes, to multi-generational living, I agree with you.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about it. You know, my grandparents live with me, so my children live with their great grandparents.
Wow.
You know, they have their own little granny flat, not a tiny house, it's attached to our house, but the benefits are enormous. And, you know, for them and their health and their well-being, it reduces the burden on, you know, nursing homes and things like that. My grandparents will never go to a nursing home. There's no need for them to go to a nursing home because they live under my roof. Why would they go there? You know, so the benefits are massive. And yeah, I'm with you. I really hope that we can see a shift and an acceptance in this space in the coming years, because yeah, I don't really see any negatives to having a tiny house or, you know, a cabin or something pitched in your backyard so that you can care for your relatives. I just don't see any negatives to that. So yeah.
Definitely. And it just kind of reminds me of that whole saying, you know, it takes a village. And you're talking about your kids and having their great grandparents in the same place. And what that kind of really brings to the family unit and how enriching that is, you know, being able to spend more time, you know, learning from them, hearing stories and all sorts of things, and just how enriching that would be for the whole family. And I think that's really, really beautiful. And yeah, we've definitely lost that along the way in, I'd say, modern culture or in some modern Western circles. So
yeah, my 5-year-old loves it because it means double dessert, because he could go to grandma's and get ice cream, and then he comes home and tells us he hasn't had any. So double dessert is always good for kids.
I love it. And then there's all those sorts of things too, for sure, as a kid.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, you know, other than for living in, what other purposes are you finding people are using cabins and tiny houses and caravans for, and the other types of homes that you have on your platform?
Yeah, huge range, you know, and especially with a lot of people now opting to work from home and things like that, we're seeing, you know, these tiny houses or cabins or any other manufactured structure being built in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and they can be used for home offices, music studios, they can be used for storage. They can be used for relocatable toilet blocks and amenities, games rooms, camp kitchens. Really, there's no limitation. You know, they are being used for a huge range of things. But probably the one that sort of seen the most growth, the category that's seen the most growth in the last short while, is home office or home studio, whether they be an art therapist and they're going to, you know, put their tiny house in their backyard and run their art therapy. I personally know a music therapist who has her own little sort of tiny house in her backyard. She's got an amazing YouTube channel. She goes out there, she runs her YouTube channel, she runs a lot of her music therapy online. And it's incredible. Like when she's in this little tiny house, it's like a different world. It's all painted bright and colourful. Sound is great. So yeah, that's what we've seen is a lot of people are moving in to get these assets so that they can work from home. They own it. Hairdressing is another big one. You know, hairdressers being able to put one of these in their backyard or on their property and be able to do, you know, all their hairdressing. You used to have to sort of forego your garage if you wanted to do that sort of thing, whereas now you can keep your garage and get a tiny house or a cabin and fit that out for your purpose. So definitely seeing an increase in that.
Wow, it really does stretch the imagination and I guess open up so many possibilities of what people can do in these spaces. Because as you say before, you might have had to clear out your garage and you know, repurpose it for certain things, or maybe having to think about going somewhere and hiring a space or whatever it might be. But you can actually do that in your own backyard or wherever it is that you have that set up. That's really, really awesome.
Yeah,
and it's actually
absolutely
getting me thinking about how all the other ways that people could use it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good thing about these assets, and I always call them assets because that's what they are, they are generally a depreciating asset, but they don't generally depreciate pretty that fast. So what we're seeing in the market is people who have a cabin, a tiny house, a caravan, they're getting their money, like they're holding value, So you might go and spend $100,000 on a tiny house and you might fit that out, because you're a hairdresser and you might have it as a spare room / hairdressing salon, right? Now you might pay, let's just say 100,000 for ease of numbers. You might keep that for 2 or 3 years and then you might have a career change. You might want to do it anymore. The chance of you selling that for a very similar price to what you bought it for is really high. The potential for you selling it for more than you actually bought it for is actually real. So on the Cabin Connect platform, because I've been running it now for like 7 years and because it started at Marul, my old park, I've sold some of those cabins personally because I used to run all the sales in my old caravan park. So I've sold some of those cabins multiple times, right? There's one cabin in particular, which is listed on the Cabin Connect platform at the moment. And like 7 years ago, I sold that cabin for $77,000. And now the new owners have listed it for $130,000. So what was once a depreciating asset has actually appreciated in value because of supply and demand, awareness of the industry, demand, so many more people wanting this, difficult to get new stock at the moment. So it's really quite amazing. And we see this with tiny houses. We see this with caravans. Caravans are really holding their value. So it's not necessarily an investment that you would make to get a return on your money, but in terms of holding that asset, using it for your work purposes, and then, as you said, not having to pay rent or something on another office building, it's a really good solution if you can make it work for you. So,
yeah, that's amazing. And speaking of supply and demand, as you just said, with the world going through this phase that we're all going through together in the last couple of years, and I'm curious, have there been more or less people looking to buy or sell through your platform? Has there been a shortage of sorts in some way?
It's really interesting because we thought that we would have a massive influx of listings at one point, and we didn't because people couldn't move around. So we sort of went stagnant for a little while. But what we've been seeing definitely over the last 6 months is a huge increase in traffic, a massive increase in sales, and the biggest increase is the demand for new product. So whether that be a new tiny house, a new cabin, whatever it is they're looking for, the demand for new product is enormous. And so what we're seeing now, and I speak to a lot of manufacturers, so what we've got on the Cabin Connect platform is we've got an industry directory. So we've actually got recommended builders who we recommend. So if there's any tiny house people listening and you're not on that platform, feel free to connect with me and I can let you know, because we only recommend people who we have a relationship with, who we know are trusted, reputable builders who are building in accordance with building codes and all of those, maintaining ethical standards and things like that. So on the industry directory, at the moment, I think I've got about 9 builders on there, and they are all very busy. And the last one I had a conversation was build time is blown out to 26 weeks. And, you're really not going to be getting stock until September, October. So we're now in January. And if you're wanting new cabins, and I've since bought a new caravan park and I need 6 new cabins. So for me to get those 6 new cabins before Christmas, which is when I want them by, I need to place that order no later than the end of February, because otherwise I'm just not going to get the stock that I need completed, installed and on site for next Christmas. So that has blown out, and it's blown out because so much demand. It's blown out because we have got supply issues at the moment. So, timber is a bit of an issue. And so then with timber becomes window frames and all of those little things. So there has been delays because of stock, materials. But, they're managing and they're getting through, and they're still looking after the customers and offering great service and all of those sorts of things. So I think we will see that build time shrink a little bit, but generally, I know for a cabin, and I'm sure a tiny house is much the same, you're not really going to be able to get anything in less than 16 weeks because most of them are being all built on a steel chassis, and then to build and fit out and have absolute, quality completion, you're looking at 16 weeks. So when I say it's blown out to 26, it is only a 10-week extension. It's not that much, but we've definitely seen a stretch in build time because of demand and because of our supply shortages for materials.
Yeah, I wonder if that's also going to continue to increase the more that things happen out there, and then I know that that there are shortages in, well, not only materials. Over here where I am, there's even starting to be food shortages and things like that too. So this is a really interesting time that we're going through, and I think it's also a massive shift in consciousness of people just like, okay, I want to maybe move out of the city closer to nature and have some kind of cabin, some kind of tiny home, some kind of caravan, whatever it might be. And yeah, it's fascinating actually to hear you say though that it kind of stopped for a while. And I guess maybe that was a reflection of like the uncertainty of, well, what is actually going on here? And we can't even like leave our homes or move around. So, but I'm hopeful that, I think what you've got here with this online platform is such a great service to the community to be able to connect and those buyers and those sellers and to help people transition into, however it is that they want to use these lifestyle homes. So that's really
absolutely great. And people transition through these opportunities for multiple reasons. People often buy into these things because they've got a young family and they think it'd be a great opportunity, but then as the kids become teenagers and they're into sports and things like that, they can't get to their cabin or they can't use their tiny house as much, and so then they sell, but then the kids leave home, so then they buy again, so it's really this life cycle that we see happening. And then we're seeing a big movement now of people selling their family home because they're empty nesters, they're now grandparents, so they're like, well, we don't need this massive house, so let's sell and move into a lifestyle community or a caravan park that offers residential living. And so what we're seeing now in the park that we've just brought, the demand for residential living, we've only owned this park for like 6 weeks now, and I think I've already got a list of like 10 people who want to live in this park, all over 55s. They're like, April, we need this, we need a cabin, we want to move in, where can we? And the reason they're doing that, as we mentioned before, sense of community. They want to be around other people. They want to be around like-minded people. They want to feel safe. They want to feel secure. They can sell their home for a good amount of money. They can buy into another asset for, $150,000 and live very comfortably, live very safely. There's park managers around all the time, or lifestyle managers, usually very similar-minded people. So it's a really great solution. And then they have all this money left over from their house that they can just retire and live comfortably off. So there's really good options out there for a lot of people.
Definitely. And I'm also noticing that there seems to be more tiny houses popping up in caravan parks as well as an option, because I know a lot of people, there's so many things you can do. Like if land, like buying your own land is an option, or if someone that has land, family, friends, or even advertising on different platforms and, finding people that have spare space. But the caravan park seems to be an option as well, whether it's a short term until someone finds somewhere more permanent, or whether it's just, for a certain period of time. I think that's really cool to see that, because several years ago, at least in my experience, you maybe drive past one or go stay in one. You might see an odd tiny house here and there, but there seems to be more, and some places even have like a community of them. So that's really great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when tiny houses hit the market for the caravan parks, there was always a little bit of hesitation because caravan parks are governed by a huge amount of legislation. So my old park used to be in New South Wales. So there's a New South Wales legislation that we had to abide by, which is enormous. Like the restrictions placed on caravan park owners is insanity. Like I haven't seen any other industry that is governed by as many regulations as a caravan park industry. And I used to be a nurse, so that's a pretty big statement, Then we've bought this new park in Victoria. So now I need to relearn the Victorian caravan park legislation because it's different to the New South Wales caravan park legislation. And I think a lot of caravan park owners were hesitant to allow tiny houses into their parks maybe 5 years ago because of the legislation. They were like, well, we don't know where you fit. We don't want to do the wrong thing. We don't want to get in trouble from council because then we don't get our license to operate, which has to be issued every year. So these are the sorts of things. But now there's more of an understanding. It's like, okay, well, a tiny house is either on wheels or it's either on a steel chassis. If it's on wheels, it fits the description of a caravan, mobile home sort of thing. If it is on a steel chassis, then it's more like a cabin. So now we've got this framework. It's like, okay, well, if it's a cabin, this is what we follow. If it's a caravan, this is what we follow. So as long as caravan park owners can sort of categorize it into one of those categories and work within the legislation, there's really no reason why we can't see more tiny houses in caravan parks. One of the biggest things that it must have is a compliance plate. So that is a big thing in caravan parks, that all of their cabins and caravans must have a compliance plate, which has all the information about who it was built by, who was the engineer, what's its wind speed tolerance, all those sorts of things. And so as long as it's got that and it's got a fitted smoke detector and it meets the separation distance requirements from its neighbouring assets, there's really no reason why it can't be there. And depending on the parks, some parks are really heavy tourist focused, so they only have tourist cabins. Others, like the park that I've just bought, it's a bit more of a hybrid. So we've got residents, we've got annual site holders, we've got tourist cabins, we've got powered sites. So I think if there's any of your listeners who were looking to place a tiny house in a caravan park, their best option is to look for a hybrid park, which are usually parks sort of like on the fringe, so our park's a bush park, or it might be a park sort of out, on a lake or something like that, but it's not super touristy, because if it's super touristy, then they generally are quite strict and rigid with what they allow in, whereas the others are a little bit more accommodating. They're like, yeah, that would look great, that'll be fine, yeah, we're open to permanent residents or semi-permanent residents. So that's what I would suggest for your listeners if they're thinking, I wouldn't mind putting a tiny house in a caravan park. Where do I go? Where do I look? Go for those sort of caravan parks that are on the fringe, that have got a lot of land, because they're probably going to be more accepting and open to what you want to do.
Perfect. I'm curious, so talking about shortage of affordable housing options in general, especially I think in a lot of the main cities around Australia, and the prices of regular sized homes seem to be skyrocketing, and many people are priced out of the market, particularly maybe young people are depending on situations. But I'm wondering, what impact do you feel this is having on everyday people and just our modern life in general?
Yeah, I think the housing, affordability is a very interesting conversation, because what we're seeing is that the actual price to build a house is actually not that much higher than what it was 20 years ago. So my parents built a brand new house 20 years ago, and reality is the amount of money that they spent is really close to the amount of money that people are spending right now. It's not gone up that much to build the actual house. What's gone up is land price, and land prices have absolutely skyrocketed. Where I live, you can't buy a block of land now for less than $1 million. And that is insanity. Yeah. How can people get into the market when they can't even buy the land for $1 million? So, and the blocks of land that people are able to afford, they're still hundreds of thousands of dollars, even in like regional towns. And so I think the land pricing is actually truly what's pushing up the market, because you can go to these big players like Metricon and Dennis Family, and you can build quite a decent home for a very, what I would say, modest price. So I think that's a big problem. And I think that as we get, higher density living in the cities, the reality is the people who can't afford to live in those inner suburbs, they have to move out. And then we get issues with getting to work and transportation and these sorts of things. So it's a very complex situation. You've got people who want to live in inner city Hawthorne, but you can't buy a place in inner city Hawthorne for less than $1.5 million. It's like, well, you might want to live there, but you can't afford to live there. So you've got to move out to an outer suburb, and then you've got to, find ways to get into work, or you've got to work close to where you live. And so people, it's the old story. People want to have their cake and eat it too. And we just can't do that. Whereas I don't really think that these options of manufactured housing, because still they're not cheap, but the land is the problem, because even if you get a manufactured house or a tiny house, you still need the land, but the land prices are what have scaled out of control. That's just my opinion. But yeah, land is just so expensive at the moment.
Yeah, it really is. And also the increase in rent, if buying is not an option and people are renting, the rent has just gone up so much in the last years as well.
Yeah, renting is insane. The amount of money that people are having to pay to rent properties is really, really crazy. And so I am questioning whether we're going to start to see this into lifestyle communities. I have had it asked to me in the last couple of weeks. So people have said, oh, April, do you have any permanent residential cabins that we can rent? So this is, I think, a potential niche or gap in the market that could be filled. So there are some really big players in the market at the moment who build lifestyle communities. And I am questioning if they're doing this as a feasibility study that, okay, well, what if we were to put in 10 3-bedroom manufactured houses, and instead of just rent them out for what they do normally, which is like a body corporate fee. So what happens is if you want to live in a caravan park or a lifestyle community, you pay a body corporate fee every year to live there. So that might be anywhere between $5,000 and probably $15,000 a year. And that money goes to your rubbish, your water, maintenance, managers' wages, all of those sorts of things that you need to keep the community running. I'm wondering if, and so for example, in my park that I own now, I've got residents and they pay $125 a week rent, but they own their own asset. And so that money that they pay, as I said, pays for their rubbish, water, manages roads, all those sorts of things. I'm wondering if we will see a movement where instead of owning your own asset, you're actually renting it. So you might pay, $6,500 in body corporate, but you might pay another $10,000 to actually rent and use the asset. So then they're paying $16,500 a year, but they've got a home, they've got a roof over their head, they've got somewhere to live, and they're also in the community. And they don't then have to do the outlay of the $180,000 to get that home in the first place. The park or the lifestyle community would buy it and then rent it. So I'm wondering if we're going to see this. I don't know of this happening at the moment, but this is something that's been raised to my awareness of a demand, but I don't know anyone who's offering it yet. And I'm wondering if we will see that, because that would definitely help reduce the housing affordability shortage. But it's whether or not you've got a company who's willing to go into that way of running a business. Ultimately, it's very different than what's been done now, because at the moment it's very much a buy and sell market, and then you just pay your body corporate fee as you would if you lived in a high-rise apartment or something that was under a strata title or something like that, so it's an interesting space, and I'm not sure what we're going to see.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I've heard similar things where, and again, I don't know if this is something that is just being talked about or if it's happening anywhere. I haven't really heard of it happening anywhere, but renters being able to, say they sign a lease for a certain period of time, and maybe they renew the release over, several years or something, that there is an opportunity for them to, you pay the rent as you go, but then, when you get towards the end of your term, or if you live in it for a long enough time where you end up paying off the cost of that place that you live in, instead of paying off someone else's home, you've just paid off your own home, which you can at some point own. So I mean, I know that, there's mortgages and those types of things, but there was something that I heard, on the grapevine just about that being sort of more directed towards people that are wanting to rent. So that's really interesting. And I guess maybe over the coming years, we'll see all sorts of different ideas and experiments and trialing different systems like that. I think there's a shift in every sense of the word, including the way that we're living. So
I think it'll be definitely very interesting. And I think that model that you're mentioning, I think if we were going to move to a model like that, it would have to be a government initiative, because business people are not going to forego profit and capital growth on an asset. But instead of, using what we've used in the past, which is like a commission type setup, that option where, people can pay their rent and effectively buy their house back off the government would be incredible.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. You get allocated this house because whether your circumstances meet the criteria, and then as you pay your rent back, you're actually buying the house back off the government. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Listen to us solving the problems of the world.
Absolutely. Now that you mentioned that, I actually feel like there was some kind of government aspect it was just an article that I read online somewhere and they were talking about it. But I don't know what the plans are. But that would be something that I think would solve a lot of problems for people. And April, I'm also wondering, so what is currently inspiring you most in this alternative living world, whether it's tiny houses or cabins or caravans? What is inspiring you most at the moment?
What's inspiring me most at the moment? The designs are really incredible. So I'm a big home lover. So I love, interior design, and I love, all of those things that come with it. So designs are really great. We're attracting some really good builders to the market. We're seeing big expansion in the building space. So one of my partners who's been hugely supportive of Cabin Connect from the word go is a company by the name of Yarrawonga Manufactured Housing. And the guys who own that, I've known them for years and years now, and they have just opened up a second massive factory in Bendigo. So they built the first one in Yarrawonga, hugely successful, quality product, quality service. They're now opening up a second massive factory in Bendigo. So I find that really inspiring, because not only are they meeting the needs of so many Australians with these manufactured homes, they're building school buildings, camp kitchens, they're building all sorts of things, but they're also employing a huge number of people. And, I see ads on their Facebook all the time. It's like, we're looking for a new store person, we're looking for a new chippy. Like, this is so great, because what we're doing is, through this movement of tiny houses, cabins, prefab structures, we're creating more Australian jobs. And that is really inspiring to me, because, I'm big on keeping as much of the Australian dollar in the Australian market as we possibly can. And we have seen a risk to this market for importation from things from China. And we just don't know how they've been built. We don't know with what materials. We don't know what quality and stuff they are. So I'm all for buying from Australians where they're manufacturing in Australia and they're employing Australian people. So that's very inspiring to me at the moment. And then I'm just loving the increase in awareness. That's great, because literally 10 years ago, most of the people didn't even know these things were an option. And caravan parks were sort of like trailer trash, and we've seen a massive increase in quality and awareness, and it's good.
Absolutely. I so agree with you with everything that you just said there. And I'm also curious, you talked about the Australian market. Do you have any plans to do anything, maybe expand into New Zealand or other parts of the world, or is it just that Australia for now, focusing on this?
I do. I'm a hugely ambitious person. One of my mentors, he's a very, very, very successful businessman. And my last mentoring session with him, I said, I'd really love to go into the US. And he said, April, put the skids on. you got to conquer the Australian market first, and then we'll talk about going into the US. So the reason I say the US will be the next place that we go with Cabin Connect. When that happens, I don't know. We've got a lot of work to still do in Australia. So the reason we will go into the US next is because based on our Google Analytics and our traffic, we see that that's where the most of interest is. So even though with all our advertising, all of our Google, all of our SEO and everything like that, we really try to keep it Australia-based. We don't want to be gathering traffic from overseas because it's pointless. They're not going to buy the stock that's on our platform. So, but we do see the country with the highest interest in Cabin Connect comes from the US. And when I visited the US 2 years ago, and they do definitely have a very similar concept to us. Tiny houses are big over there. They've got a lot of these lifestyle communities over there. So that will be the next place that we go, will be to the US. But that's a whole nother ball game because you're looking at 10 times the population, 10 times the website traffic, 10 times everything. So not sure when that will happen.
That's great, though. It's great to, have goals and aspirations and big plans. And I think that the US tiny house movement and the alternative living movement, that they seem to be maybe a little bit further ahead than we are. I know there's so many communities and there's so much content online and people sharing their journeys and what's happening over there. And it's really beautiful to see. And it's great that you're getting people from the US, finding your platform. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's good. It's exciting. And there's a lot of innovative design over there, of innovative design.
Definitely. And, so as we wrap up the conversation today, April, are there any exciting projects coming up for you in Cabin Connect this year, or is there anything else that you'd like to share with everyone listening?
Yeah, well, this year we're excited to go and be able to go to expos because expos have not been on for a long time. So if any of your listeners are at any home expos and things like that, we really are trying to get to as many of those as possible. So please, stop past and say hello and have a chat to us. We will be going to, the Melbourne Home Show in the next month or so. And when we go there, we obviously are exhibiting the platform, but we're also exhibiting all of our partners and trades who advertise and use the Cabin Connect platform, talking to people about what we've been talking about today, the evolution of this industry. And that's what we're excited about, is to be able to get out and about in the car and meet builders and meet, consumers and talk tiny houses and cabins and all the things that we do on a daily basis. We're really excited to do that again, which is, something we're really looking forward to.
Yes, excited to be there in person and see everyone and connect. That's great. And
yes.
will you be going to any of the tiny homes expos that are coming up? I think there's
one coming up this weekend, which I'm going to try and get to. We didn't get a stall for that one. I don't know. That sort of slipped through our radar. There is a Bendigo one coming up that we'll be going to. And then we want to try and push up into the New South Wales coast. So we're only sort of getting back into the office as of next week. We've sort of been remote working because me and my team, we've all got children. So once we get back into the office, it'll be a matter of mapping out what events are on for the rest of the year and what we can get to and get to as many as we can.
Perfect. That sounds great. I know there's some tiny homes expos, like there's one coming up in Sydney, maybe in March or April. And I think there'll be some more as we're able to have more bigger gatherings and events. I think there'll be more popping up too. So that's great. And where can people find and connect with you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is cabinconnect.com.au. So if you head to Cabin Connect, that you will see we've got a phone number, email address, contact form. So if you do need any help, any support, head to cabinconnect.com.au. And we're all here to give you a hand.
Oh, perfect. Thanks so much. I'll put everything in the show notes, which if anyone wants to go check out, find these different links, connect with April and Cabin Connect online. I'll put that at tinyhouseconversations.com. And I just want to say, April, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your wisdom and letting us know all about Cabin Connect. It's been really great.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Pleasure. And if you're listening to this episode, thanks so much for taking the time to hang out with us. Make sure you go check out Cabin Connect online. And if you want more Tiny House conversations, I release new episodes every Thursday. So make sure you hit the subscribe button so you know exactly when the latest episode is live. And I'll see you next time. Hey, Tiny Lifers, thanks so much for listening. And before you go, one of the best ways to support this podcast is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more valuable tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So make sure you head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this episode and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thanks so much in advance. I appreciate you and see you in the next session.